Hello and welcome to the Mets in the UK podcast, bringing you all things Mets from a UK perspective. Today, your host is Tom, NYM UK, flying things solo. My usual co-host, Toria, is currently on a plane on her way to New York to watch our Mets play the Phillies. So I'll be holding things down on my own, but not just on my own today. This is the special edition of the Mets in the UK podcast, joined by our returning special guest, Wayne Randazzo. Wayne, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, great. Thanks for asking. Thank you for giving up your time to talk all things Mets and maybe a little bit of Angels as well ahead of this weekend's big series. So if we start there, how are you feeling about the last Apple broadcast of the year? Mets versus Phillies. There's quite a lot on the line for both teams at this stage of the season. This is another season for you with Apple. How are you feeling about completing another year with them? And are you going to be back for more next year?
Yeah, but I hope so. I'd love to continue on. Apple TV, I think, has done a really nice job making Friday Night Baseball a big time broadcast, and we got a big time game this week to end it. It's always bittersweet at the end when you think about being at the finish line, but in this case, it's such a big game, and we're really going to be fortunate to see the Mets play the Phillies on what is a huge game for the Mets, and the Phillies are getting closer to clinching the National League East as well. So should be a great atmosphere, I would imagine, in New York at Citi Field. And this is kind of when playoff baseball begins, when you're one of the teams that's on the outside or really right at the edge of making it. So, the playoffs kind of start now for the Mets and maybe kind of feel like they already have in some ways, but you're getting playoff-like competition now playing the Phillies and the Braves and the Brewers to end the season. So this is how it starts for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose as a follow-up to that, really sort of you commentate on a lot of baseball. Do you notice around this time of year the atmosphere changing in the stadium? How is it sort of compared to regular games during the season?
Yeah, I think you will see that certainly over the course of the next couple of weeks for the teams that are desperately fighting to get in, that it will take on that feel. They'll start to manage and play the games that way as if they're already in October. So you do sometimes at this time of the year you see teams that are out of the race playing teams that are in the race, and you get kind of this juxtaposition of how the teams are approaching the games, where one team is really fighting for its survival and the other team is just trying to make sure they get to the finish line without any serious injuries and just playing through the schedule. But in the Mets and Phillies case, you get two teams that know that they have a good chance to play in October. Certainly, the Phillies will be in the postseason, and the Mets are hoping to get there. So you will see really a playoff-like game, and really in all these cases, especially when the Mets play Atlanta. Those are essentially playoff games. I mean, they might not have the bunting and the paint on the field, but for all intents and purposes, those are going to be postseason atmosphere and postseason level games.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course the Mets will be finishing off the season with a few games against the Brewers as well, which will be no easy feat to end the season going into the postseason. Now, last year when you joined us, we were coming off the back of the All-Star break. Quite a different Mets team in 2023. What's your take on the 2024 Mets compared to the one that you spoke about last year? Are we going to see Lindor MVP? I know you're a big Ohtani guy, but are we going to see it? He's been exceptional. I know he's out at the moment, but he's been exceptional for the Mets this year.
He has, and I think he deserves MVP consideration. I think when you think about what Shohei has done offensively, he's set himself apart in such a way where it will be difficult to overcome that. And you also have, it's not just anyone doing this 50-50 chase. It is Shohei Ohtani, and he already has 2 MVP awards, and he already has all this fandom and hysteria that really follows him. So you're not only overcoming Shohei's numbers, you're overcoming Shohei mania. And I think ultimately that will be too much for Lindor to overcome as far as being the MVP. But Francisco would deserve it if he did end up being the MVP. And he's certainly guided this Mets ball club to a height that people weren't expecting. They did not have the big names in the rotation like they had last year or really the last number of years when they had Jacob deGrom still as well. So doing this with Sean Manaea and Luis Severino and these guys having bigger years than people expected, especially with Kodai Senga being out for a lot of the year too, the Mets pitching has held up. in a way, especially in September, that people weren't really thinking it would. And also on top of that, they've hit the ball extremely well this year. Even in a year where Pete Alonso has not had his best season, and it took Jeff McNeil some time to get going, and now he's hurt. You still had other guys stepping up, and Lindor, namely among them, having very good offensive seasons. Mark Vientos has been huge for them. So you look around this Mets ball club, they have found ways to get it done. They have found ways to win, and they have been able to not only turn a good month into a good couple of months, they turned it into a great season. And now they will try to finish it off and see the fruits of that with, a champagne party that puts them in the postseason.
Yeah, I suppose knowing baseball as well as you do, would you say that the Mets have surprised you a bit this year with the way things have gone, especially after the month of May?
Yeah, no question. They've surprised, I think, everyone to be in this position. You need a little bit of luck along the way. I don't know if they would be quite where they are without Atlanta suffering some injuries. I mean, the Braves have been decimated this year by many injuries, and that's part of the deal. That happens. Certainly the Mets have been there on the other end of that. So they're not going to sit there and feel badly for what Atlanta's gone through. Arizona has had a lot of issues pitching and closing out games, and that's helped the Mets. But when you put together a record like the Mets have had, and a team that could possibly win 90 games this year, that's a good season by any metric. I mean, when they went to the World Series in 2015, I believe they finished that year with right around 90 wins, which was enough that season to win the division. So it doesn't matter how you get in. It doesn't really matter what the record looks like at the end of the season, as long as you're in the postseason. Arizona showed that last year. The Phillies showed that the year before. And the Mets, I think, have a lot of the ingredients that they need, not only to get there, but to have success when they do.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see how that progresses. Thanks for your takes on that. That's really great. Last time you were on the show as well, you were talking about heading back to Citi Field for the first time from moving all the way out to Anaheim. You were talking about the Mets scoreboard, which, for those of our regular listeners who maybe haven't made it out to Citi Field, you said you were looking forward to seeing how it is in person. Now that you've actually been back, what are your thoughts on the scoreboard and the changes to Citi Field from when you were there doing radio with Howie?
It's massive. It's a big scoreboard. It certainly takes on a life of its own when you're in the ballpark there. So I think the last time I did a game there, I think when I was Milwaukee, it was Milwaukee where I was at a game, but they have a big one too, and it was off the entire game. Which was an interesting way, just a big black screen out there in center field. But the Mets' big screen out there in center field is certainly large, and there's changes to the ballpark every time I go there. It seems like now, they've redone a lot of the lobby areas and kind of the tunnel areas inside, down underneath the ballpark. There's been a lot of changes already outside and around the stadium where there used to be all the chop shops and everything that was over there that might not have been very, very pleasant or welcoming, but now all of those are pretty much knocked down, and they're getting ready for the next phase of what they're building over there, including that soccer stadium that's going up around there in a couple of years. So it's evolving rapidly around Citi Field, and it sounds like it will continue to for the next few years, but it's always fun to go back, and I'm looking forward to seeing that place packed and lively as only Citi Field can be tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, your time with the Mets goes back quite a way, 2015, if I remember correctly. And during that time, sort of longtime friend of yours, Steve Gelbs, you and him started working sort of with the Mets around the same time. And this year, when the Mets were in Anaheim, you got to do play-by-play alongside Gelbs. How was that for you? And would you like to return to Mets broadcasting at any point in the future? Are Randazzo and Gelbs the new GKR?
Well, Steve, has worked a long time there, and he's put in a lot of hard work as to be I think, the best sideline reporter in Major League Baseball, and I think that he really has earned his place in Mets history with how he's performed in that job over the last decade. And when I left to go take the Angels TV job, it opened up some fill-in opportunities when Gary Cohen misses some games, which admittedly is not very many. Gary doesn't miss a lot, but if you're looking for a chunk of games as a fill-in play-by-play guy on TV broadcast in the major leagues, the Mets is not that spot because Gary is hardly ever gone. But there are occasions when he is, and Steve I think is getting better at that role. It's not something he ever even wanted to do. It was kind of me kind of pushing him and others as well to say, you can do this, and this is possible if you really learn the trade and give yourself some opportunities to get better at it. So he's getting there, and I think he's done an admirable job filling in for Gary on the games that he has missed, and something new for him. And I think you really would have a hard time guessing how many games he's called or how few games he's called by how accustomed he seems to be at doing it. So proud of Steve for putting his foot out there the way that he has with that role, and I'm sure if more opportunities come along, he'll continue to get better and better at it. And proud of him. It was an awesome experience to do the same game as him, me doing the Angels TV broadcast and Steve doing the Mets. And it'd be fun to get more opportunities like that down the road, and we'll see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, so I suppose it's a case of never say never, really, when it comes to your industry. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, things are always moving. I mean, we don't even know how TV landscape is going to be in the next 5 or 10 years. Things are changing so much with regional sports networks and with how broadcasts are done. And look at Apple; that's a great example of a streaming service that has come in and started to make its own indentation in the market. And there's going to be a lot more of that moving forward. So, I think that teams and broadcasters and everyone will be figuring this out as we go along.
Yeah, and I think that can only be good for the game, growing it and putting it in front of more people. I know that blackouts are quite an issue for people in the US. It's not something we tend to experience here in the UK, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting time to be a baseball fan. Plenty of choice, as you say. Whilst we're talking about sort of broadcasting and things, how has this season gone for you personally over with the Angels? So this is your second year now doing the role. How does it compare to the first year? Have you sort of noticed anything, any comparisons, or any way you're feeling about things at the end of year 2?
No, I think it's a really great place to be. And even though the Angels in the standings, especially this year, have not won at the number of games you'd like to be calling, and certainly you want to call wins and great moments. I mean, you look around the teams that are in the playoff races, and they're always having these monumental achievements and great moments, and the crowds and all that. Although the Angels still get really very good crowds to their games despite their record. But other than that, it's a beautiful place to be. Southern California is really can be a paradise of sorts, especially for a baseball job. There are no rain delays. There's every reason to believe you'll start the game on time and end it around the time it's supposed to end, and be able to carry on with whatever you have going on that day around it. So it's great. I have really good partners and a crew that I work with on Angels games. Mark Gubicza, who pitched with the Royals, has been announcing for the Angels for close to 2 decades now, and he's very entrenched with the fan base and the organization, and he's a great guy to work with, and we have fun, and it's a good time. So I think as far as places to end up outside of after leaving the Mets, I found a really good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a video of you and Mark on your Instagram page if anyone's listening or watching along on YouTube. Strongly recommend you go and check it out. It looks like you guys have a real laugh in the booth together, and you've got great chemistry definitely going on.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's important, I think, in a long season and with 3-hour broadcasts every night to keep it fun. I think that's what fans really can relate to, and especially when the team's not going so good, to have still some things to be entertained by and chuckled about, I think is important. And I'm glad that we're able to provide that for a really good and loyal fan base in Anaheim.
Yeah, I mean, this year's been the first year for the Angels without Shohei, which is quite a big sort of adjustment for the fan base. Have you noticed any sort of changes on that side of things without him being around the ball club?
Not as many as I thought I would. Certainly Shohei has, and it brings an influx of Asian fans and Asian sponsors, and there is a little bit of a difference in that regard. But I think that I was impressed by how the fans are still around, and that they still draw really good crowds, and that the Angels really haven't taken a big hit as far as attendance from last year to this year, even with Shohei leaving. So I think that's a credit to the Angels fans, and Shohei is not far away, anyone that still wants to see him can go do that. And he's certainly had a remarkable year. And like I said, I think it's going to be tough for Lindor to knock him off the MVP, which would be another historic one. It'd be his third MVP. He'd be just the second guy to win the MVP in both leagues. So it's a big deal what Shohei's doing as a Dodger.
Yeah, absolutely. And, fair play to him for stepping up, for all due respect to the Angels, stepping up to the Dodgers and still being able to bring it on a bigger stage. So what have you actually thought of the rest of the Angels team this year then? Is there anything you've particularly enjoyed about their season this year? I know they've got quite a few young players coming through as well.
Yeah, that's been the biggest thing, is seeing the young players develop before our eyes. Zach Neto, the shortstop, has hit 20 homers and stolen 30 bases and hit 30 doubles this year, and he's a very good defender at shortstop, and he's only 23 years old, so he's certainly been a guy to follow this year. The catcher, Logan O'Hoppe, got him in the same boat. Ben Joyce, who took over the closer's role midway through the season, he has an incredible arm, hitting 105 miles an hour on some of his fastballs. So it's been a joy to watch the young guys develop. The Angels making a commitment to letting these guys learn at the major league level, and they just need more talent around these guys to start to win more games.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we're thinking about the Angels and the sort of vibe around the team, it seems like a really positive one. Sort of similar to the Mets, really. They've got their Halo celebration, which they're known for, still carrying that on. Obviously, the Mets this year, it's been crazy in terms of things going on around the club. The Grimace celebration, the OMG, and everything going on there. As someone that's grown up with baseball and is aware of sort of baseball traditions and stuff, what's your take on this sort of celebrations and the fun side of baseball? Is it good for the team, or is it unnecessary? Like, is it ruining the tradition of baseball? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's great. I think, baseball can have a reputation sometimes of being a little stuffy and a little bit, not as fun as it probably should be. And I think we started to see that more during the World Baseball Classic, whether it was the fans in Taiwan or Japan and how they celebrated in the middle of the games, and even the Latin American countries with how, just vocal and loud and gregarious that they were during the games with their celebrations. So I think it's great that baseball at the major league level is warming up to that and allowing players to show their personalities more, allowing players to feel free to have more fun on the field. And I think the fans, get into it with them. Whether it's on a strikeout or a home run or the way they celebrate a win, it doesn't have to be the way that it used to be just because that's the way it was. And I think that baseball will only help itself by allowing more flair and more personality and more color into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously one of the main things is about growing that game. We've seen that with the international games that are taking place around the world as well. Helping to contribute towards that. Do you think there's anything else that's sort of really missing from baseball to help it grow compared to other American sports like NBA, NFL, or even NHL?
Say that one more time.
Do you think there's anything that's sort of missing from MLB that the other sort of major sports in America do, like NFL and NBA, that they can use to sort of grow the game? Is there anything they can learn from looking around?
I just think you should, the more you can market the players, the better. I think, allowing them to, be covered in such a way or putting them out there in their own way, the more coverage you get around the media and around mainstream media, the more the game will continue to grow. I think baseball is in a good place. People enjoy watching. I think the ratings are largely very good locally. It's tough to compare to the NFL because they play 1 day a week, and they have, in a world that's changing, and as society changes, people are busier, and there's phones and computers and tablets and everything that's seeking people's entertainment value. The football at least allows you to come in once a week and watch the games, and then you go about you offer it 3.5 hours a week, whereas baseball is a much deeper time commitment. And giving fans access totally to videos and players and whatever marketing ideas there are I think will help the game grow to its fullest. It doesn't mean it will ever be what the NFL is now. I think that ship has probably sailed for baseball being the most popular sport when the NFL is at the pace that it is right now. But certainly baseball can be as popular as possible if it allows, just a little bit more open access to being able to watch the games, being able to watch the highlights, and being able to learn about who these players are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think echoes kind of what you were saying earlier to do with Apple and the work that they've been doing as well as the regional networks as well. It's definitely an exciting time. And, I know here in the UK, we all appreciate watching baseball in any form. However we can get it, it's all good as far as we're concerned. So just a few more to sort of finish things off, Wayne. I know you're pressed for time. You're a busy man. And thank you again for chatting to us about baseball. So last time you were on, we asked our 3 questions that we usually ask to guests on the show. Rather than repeat them, people can go back and listen to the previous episode if they like your takes on that. Just for fun, who do you think is going to make the World Series this year? And who do you want to make the World Series this year? You don't have to say the Mets, even though this is a Mets podcast.
Well, I'll be rooting for the Mets in the National League, certainly. We'll see. The Padres are looking like they have everything that it takes to be a champion going in. No team has really stood out in either league this year as being a clear favorite, but I think the Padres, to me, would be the scariest team to play for any of the other teams that are headed to the postseason. In the American League, I really don't know. I personally think it's going to be Houston. They have kind of been under the radar because their record was so poor at the beginning of the year. They never have gotten up to the wins leaders in Major League Baseball. So they're still the 3rd best record in the American League. Actually, they're the 4th best record in the American League, but they'd be the 3rd seed as the 3rd division champion. But if you look at their record since about May 1st, they have the best record in baseball. So I think that they've shown for a long period of time that they're pretty good again. And I think if I had to pick one American League team, that would be probably the one that I would go with.
Yeah, I think they're always strong in the postseason. Houston, aren't they? They're definitely one of those teams. It's an interesting shout on the Padres. Obviously, last time the Mets made it into postseason, they came up against the Padres and really struggled in that series. So hopefully there'll be a different outcome this time. But I like that you're rooting for the Mets. That's definitely a great answer there. Secondly, what's your favorite play call that you've made this season? Obviously, you make a lot of calls. There's a lot of big events that happen during the games, but is there any 1 or 2 that particularly stand out for you from this season?
I think anytime a player has a big milestone to reach is always fun. Zach Neto's had some big moments for the Angels this year, whether it was his 20th homer or his 30th steal. Those things always stand out. I called a walk-off homer for the Angels for the first time this year. They didn't hit one all of last year, but this year Logan O'Hoppe hit one. That was a fun moment. Some of the Apple games for me personally, doing a national TV broadcast at Wrigley Field was really special. From Chicago and grew up a big Cubs fan, and so calling a game at Wrigley Field on a Friday afternoon for Apple TV was extremely special to me. So those are some of the moments that stand out for this year.
Yeah, that sounds like there's a real sort of sense of pride in what you do. So I can understand why doing the Cubs game at Wrigley Field as a Cubs fan, that's definitely a big one, hard to top. Whilst we're talking about cities, if you could pick one city for an MLB expansion team, where would you choose and why?
I would hope that Montreal would be on their list again. I think Montreal is a beautiful summer city. People rave about having been there when the Expos were still around. You'd think that there would be a thirst for baseball still in that city, considering the history of the Expos, and bringing a second team back to Canada, I think would be a nice thing. So I would love if Montreal ended up having a team, but it sounds like Nashville. Well, I think Nashville is actually going to be a good spot for Major League Baseball. And then as far as another expansion city, well, it looks like we're getting Vegas, whether we want it or not. But but that shouldn't be an expansion unless something goes wrong with the A's move there, and then they would be in line for an expansion team. But if the A's do make it to Vegas and Nashville does end up with a team, I hope the other team ends up in Montreal.
Would you want to see that as a rebrand of the Expos, or would you want a new name to sort of go with that and leave the Expos in the history books?
I think they'd have to work that out, actually, I believe, with the Washington Nationals. I think they still would own the Montreal Expos and that name and everything. I wouldn't mind if they had their own thing again and kind of got just a new identity and a new team, a new ballpark. I don't think you have to reach back to the Expos necessarily, but I don't think it'd be a bad thing either. Certainly, they had a great uniform concept over the years, and I don't think anybody would mind seeing the Montreal Expos back entirely.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of times here in the UK where I've seen people wearing Expos hats, and I've almost had to do a double take walking down the street. Like, normally you used to seeing people in Yankees hats and Dodgers hats, and seeing anything that's not those two, it always makes you do a double take. So, yeah, absolutely. I think I can agree with that one. Montreal would definitely be a good shout. I know you say Nashville's pretty much a lock at this point from the sounds of it, but
exactly.
Yeah, Montreal would be good. Right, Wayne, thank you ever so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you giving your time ahead of the Mets Phillies series. Just to wrap things up, I want to give a shout out to the regular listeners who are checking in on YouTube and Spotify, where else you can get your podcasts. If this is your first time checking out the show, please give us a subscribe, a thumbs up, a like, or a comment. It helps us really grow the show moving forwards. Once again, thank you to Wayne Randazzo for joining us on today's special edition of the Mets in the UK podcast. And all that leaves for me to say is, let's go Mets.
All right. Thank you very much.